how could a good God order the Israelites to slaughter not just the men, but the women and children, especially the little children of the Canaanites?
Mm-hmm.
Now, I don't claim to know the answer to this, and this is greatly debated, but I would just like give you a perspective that I became acquainted with, which probably in 2020, that made it much more plausible. I mean, first you have to point out that God, if God exists, is a perfect being, and he's not going to do things in half measures. He is not satisfied with an imperfect creation.
Mm-hmm.
He is a holy God, and he wants us to be holy. And that's why here he expects righteousness of us. Ultimately, he wants us to be sanctified in the end, glorified in the end. That doesn't explain it, of course. Another part of the explanation is one of the features of justice, and especially divine justice in the Bible, and I would argue in the rest of the world as well, is the corporate dimension, right? So the idea is that when we take actions, we are taking actions not just as individuals, but as members of groups which are doing things. Like you now are acting as a member of the LCMS,
mm-hmm.
I believe.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I am, acting as a representative of, Christians, I hope. That's a big burden, but whatever. I'm doing my best. But I think that's true, actually. When Adam, or rather when Adam and Eve were made to look at their sin by God, Eve first said, well, the serpent tempted me.
Mm-hmm.
And Adam said, well, this woman that you gave me, she gave me the apple. So there's this attempt to spread out the blame. You see what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
And the whole point is that when we act in proximity to each other, not even necessarily as groups, we think of our actions in terms of, and we are influenced by other people, right? So the point is, when an entire society is deeply corrupted, there actually can come a point when the children are beyond hope.
Mm.
I mean, forget about the adults. They're all gone. But even the children, there's no way for those children to be rescued, essentially.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if they're little babies, I don't know. That's another, perhaps even harder problem. I'm not saying I've given up on that one, but but perhaps the idea is they would know that they came from Canaanites. It would be reasonable to think that some Canaanites would, by hook or crook, actually survive, and then they would return to the old ways, and God wanted to put an end to that whole line of development, which is what happened in the flood,
mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah.
And what happened after the flood was the Tower of Babel.
Mm-hmm.
So in the Tower of Babel, the opportunity for all of humanity to be unified and fall into the same sort of depravity was stymied when there was the great scattering across the face of the earth, and then after that, so the necessity of entirely wiping out the Canaanites just suggested that that the entire tribe was richly deserving in being made, as it were, an evolutionary dead end.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like God is just going to chop them off.
Mm-hmm.
Now, God being being entirely omniscient, knew what would happen,
Mm-hmm.
and that wouldn't happen.
Mm-hmm.
In other words, they would go on. And it's also possible that he was showing that that very sort of thing would ultimately have to be avoided.
Mm-hmm.
But they weren't ready for that sort of lesson because, the people at that time burst, slash, and burn, kill everything that moves.
Mm-hmm.
And that's how they acted sometimes. The Babylonians were famous for that.